for joining us. Thanks, Jen, for putting this together and making sure we can all see each other.
My apologies.
All good. So our agenda, I will officially call the meeting to order. We'll go over our previous meeting minutes, the public workshop, and then the real kind of meat of today's meeting is we have some stakeholder interviews that we've completed we wanted to share with you, and then we will open it up for public comment and we'll be finished. So I know I'm between you and lunch, so I will try to keep it brief, but I do want to summarize all of the stakeholder interviews that we did do because we gleaned a lot of information from that. So the first thing is the meeting minutes. Hopefully everyone had time to review the meeting minutes from the May 6th meeting. Are there any questions, comments, concerns, or discussion about that? All right, I don't see any hands raised. Hearing none. Could I request a motion to accept the meeting minutes?
So moved.
Linda, and a second?
I second.
All
That's
right,
Beth.
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, we've got official meeting minutes. So old business, we had our public workshop on May 17th. The positives from the workshop, we did a fantastic hybrid public workshop. It was as true to hybrid as it could possibly be. Big shout out and thank you to everyone involved who made that happen. It was great. We did have 10 participants virtual. We had no participants live, so they didn't get to see our master plan come together. But our 10 participants that were virtual were also either on the policy or the tech committee. So the bad news is we had no one attend from the public. And so we just wanted to have a brief discussion on, if there's any thoughts or feedback on what we could do different to get people to come out or to advertise. One thing we've been discussing is, maybe each either committee member or agency, people that are active in the area, you could provide a list to us and we will, personally invite them to try to make sure that they're aware that this study is happening, make sure that, they're aware that their attendance is important to us, that we really do want their feedback. So I'll open it up to the group if you have any thoughts.
Sonia, I'll start. This is Linda. I don't think people are aware. I know they were aware originally when there was an article in the newspaper, but I don't think people were aware of the May 17th date at all. So I think that is probably one of the main contributing factor on why you didn't have public participation, and maybe something should have went in the newspaper again, or a public service announcement about that this is happening. I don't know what the outreach was before the May 17th date. And I personally, for our group, would love to have something that we can post on social media that actually can get them to whatever it is, the virtual link, not just telling them that this is going on, but actually have an action item in the social media post.
Okay.
This is Dawn from the City of Dover. I know we shared the announcement at our planning commission meetings, our other boards and commissions that were meeting leading up to that date. And I do believe we did push it to our social media, but that was kind of, I think, days before the event. to get public that's from that area, you're probably going to have to almost direct mail to them to get any kind of attention.
Any other thoughts or feedback? I appreciate Dawn and Linda, your thoughts. I wrote it down, took notes, so we'll make sure we incorporate that into our advertisement campaign for, we have the charrette coming up in September, and then in December, we'll have our second and final workshop where we're basically, summarizing the entire study and presenting the parts of the report. Okay, so I think we can move on. We did complete, let me get to where I can advance the slide. We completed 17 stakeholder interviews. Myself, Drew Boyce, and Matt Jordan were in about 98% of them, all three of us together. I missed a couple. I think Matt only missed one, and Drew attended them all. So we really did get a lot of good information out of these interviews, and I'll share with you that information in a couple slides, but I did want to show who we have completed interviews, and then we do have a handful still remaining. We have dates for all but two. We're still working on getting dates for the two that we don't. So our goal is to have all the stakeholder interviews completed as soon as possible, and not miss anyone. Based on vacations and scheduling, things like that, it was a little difficult at times to get dates that worked for everyone, but we were able to squeeze everyone in. So as I go through each of these slides, I certainly invite Drew and Matt. I'm not sure if you're on. I think that's probably the phone number that's part of us. Feel free to jump in. Also, if anyone on this committee has any questions or comments or feedback, by all means, this can be, it doesn't have to be just me talking and giving out information. We can certainly have a conversation. And I do summarize some of the recurring, you're going to hear a lot of, recurring topics throughout. There's just some things that were very evident that, we should take a look at, and that'll really come through. But there's also a few nuances that we didn't necessarily know about. So City of Dover, we met with them, and obviously the active zoning is based on, that includes the airport environs overlay as well as the industrial park. And one thing that we talked about with the City of Dover was reviewing the ordinances, because they were put into place quite some time ago. They have been revised as time's gone on, but meeting the future needs of the base. So one of the things that we learned as part of these interviews is this type of study will really more than likely not come around again until the mission of the base would change, and there's no foreseeable change to the mission right now. So this is our chance to really look forward into the future and have this plan and the policies that come out of this work for the long haul for the base. So one discussion that we had, which this was one of our first interviews, so it was very early on, was, is there something that we should be looking at in terms of a threshold or a cap on the number of people that could be in the different APZ zones? Like a number of people per acre, something like that. And so as we started going through the interviews, this discussion came up a couple times, is there some sort of overlay over these zones, the zoning, or something that can be put into place just to help even, kind of further define these areas and make sure that we are taking into account the base's safety and operations. And then, looking at the cumulative impacts of smaller decisions. So, you approve a warehouse here, you approve a, 3 residence subdivision there, and, each one on its own is potentially fine for the future of the base, but all of them, if you start looking at them together, are you really starting to get numbers creeping up? So looking at those types of decisions and what we could do to help mitigate that, just awareness of what's going on, communication. And two things that came out of that were, looking at warehouses. You'll hear a lot about warehouses throughout. Warehouses are a great use of the land use in this area, but also, then the question comes up, well, what happens with those warehouses? We approve it, we think it's some boxes and, one person here or there from time to time. And as we see pop up, there's different uses happening, kids trampoline park or things like that, where all of a sudden there's a lot of people frequenting. Same with churches. They're allowed in almost all zones, but some of them have a fair number of people. So, things like that we want to take a look at, as well as solar farms. They will require a glint and glare study from the DoD if they're within a certain area, and not everyone was familiar with the need for that study. So while the agencies are very good at communicating and coordinating, we realized that there is a lot of positives in all of this that's already working very well. There was some communication that could be improved, and certainly knowing that as solar farms are coming into the area, this needs to be taken into account. So that's one thing we looked at. And then we talked about sewer and water upgrades. So, where are there, where's development going to occur? Where could annexation occur? Where could improvements or expansion of utilities occur? So we touched on that on a more general level. And in general, the city of Dover is obviously a very good partner with the base, and both the base and the city of Dover are looking for any way that they could interact better together. So, and that really went for all of the interviews that we had. So that was city of Dover. If there's no questions, I'll move on. And let me know if I'm glazing over it too much or if I'm going too in depth. We basically did each of these interviews for roughly an hour a piece. I took really extensive notes. My notes are like 30 pages long. And so we got a lot of information, but I didn't want to keep you here with, tons of information. So we met with Kent County. Similarly, they have the airport environment zone. And we talked about the Air Force bases areas of concern. So they weren't as familiar with those as they were the zones that came out of the ACU study. So I think there'll be some conversations happening even earlier than the implementation of this study, which is fantastic. But we certainly want to make sure that all agencies and all entities that are in a position to, review plans, policy, et cetera, know about these areas of concern and can make decisions with that in mind. Same thing you'll hear, land uses, concerned about warehousing and future uses. So just taking a look at the codes that are in place, what's happening now and what could potentially happen in the future, and just trying to figure out, how we manipulate that so that it is in the best interest of the base in the long term. We did talk about the borrow pit, and you'll hear in a later slide, we did also speak with the plant manager of the borrow pit. So, the county would like to see this area tie into the St. John's Greenway, and, just lots of ideas, lots of brainstorming for the borrow pit. I think there'll be a lot of great discussion that comes into play during our charrette in September. I think anyone who knows anything about the borrow pit has an idea of what it could and should be or should not be. And so all of those ideas can be vetted out. And then, they even wondered, does the Air Force Base have a mechanism to purchase the property? And then, they definitely secure that its use will always be compatible. We did talk about the Garrison Oak Connector Road. So there is some money fiscal year 2025 for preliminary engineering. And similarly, we talked about, utility improvements as well as solar farms. We did meet with the town of Camden. The town of Camden is a big supporter for military housing. So military housing at the Air Force Base, as well as I think most in the country has become privatized, and at the Air Force Base, there's not enough housing in place to support all the personnel, and so they do have housing out in the community. The town of Camden is a big supporter of that housing. And so we talked a little bit about that, what housing is coming in the near future, in the long term, how many rental units of places, like 80% are military personnel, and how that could be affected by more so transportation than I would say land use. But certainly, we want to make sure that people can get around and have connectivity to these different places as well as the base. In terms of ordinances, the town of Camden was a little bit further out, so height concerns, things like that were a little bit less than those immediately next to the base. And then, in terms of getting the personnel to the base, the Camden Bypass Project and the US 13 widening projects will certainly help the travel time for that. We talked with the Kent Economic Partnership, and we talked a lot about what development, could be coming in, is definitely coming in, and certainly the joint use agreement. So that was also a recurring theme that came up in a lot of our discussions. I think the general consensus was everyone's waiting for that to get finalized and signed and put into place, and then development can definitely occur. A lot of it in around the CDAC is of an aeronautics basis, so that is very compatible with the base. There's several property owners that have a lot of land around the study area or in the study area, and so making sure that everything's in place so that they're compatible is very important. And in talking with Linda, some of the property owners, aren't as aware of the building height restrictions, trying to get that information out. It's the frangibility zone. So, as the planes are coming in, taking off, you want to make sure that everything within that zone is breakaway. And as you go, as you get closer to the base, the heights are more and more restricted. So just making sure that all that information is getting out to, every last person that's involved in this, especially as land is getting developed, for the engineers who are working on it and the planners and the agencies, it just makes a cleaner process if everyone is aware of it. So we talked about how can we get that information out so that everyone knows that that is part of the building in that area. We also discussed potential growth along Lafferty Lane, Horse Pond Road. And then we had that same discussion of, is there a way to prescribe how many people per acre are allowed in these zones, or, some sort of zoning overlay that helps maintain that. And then just in general, we talked a lot about growth and development as a result of the Horse Pond connector. So when that road comes in, is that going to be the catalyst for development along there? And how do we make sure that those uses are compatible? So similar discussions. We talked with the Dover Kent MPO. There's a lot of studies going on in and around this study area. So there is so much information that we can use to determine, not just existing conditions, but also where growth is headed, where development is headed, where transportation improvements are going, which may be a spark for new development, where connections are going to make going from here to there easier. All this information is already available and already completed. So we don't want to start from scratch. We want to read those studies. We want to use them as the foundation for this plan. The work's already done, so we don't need to redo it. We also learned about the Dover Air Force Base transportation study, which will be finished just after our study is finished. So we're making sure that we coordinate with that study and try to at least have an ear to listen in on those meetings so that anything that comes out, we can incorporate into this study as well. There is the talk or a potential for, is there a possibility to use rail for cargo? Right now, it all comes in by truck. And so, is there an alternative to help take some of the edge off the roads? We also discussed the challenges of, all the base access points are along SR1. And what happens with SR1? There's beach traffic. There's times when DelDOT has to do a repair, whether it's planned or it's an emergency repair. There's events, Firefly, NASCAR, base training weekends. All of that are times when SR1 is congested, and it's hard for personnel to get to the base. It's hard for the community when they're trying to use one of our major highways, if there's an incident at the base where they need to close SR1. So DelDOT and the base are always in communication with each other and definitely have plans in place. But there are times when the transportation is an issue. So the third lane widening along SR1 will provide some relief to that. And as part of the transportation plan, the base is looking at, can they relocate some or all of the access points to other roadways? But then they're looking at, well, if they move it to SR9 or another road, is there an issue with some of the other areas of the base, munitions, safety, school, storage? We want to make sure that we're not creating a brand new problem by solving another one. And, there's personnel on the base who either don't have vehicles or only have one and they're using it already. How do they get off the base and have a way to get around and get to places? It's not that easy. It's a very obviously secure place. So, buses can't just freely come in and things like that. So we did talk about the transportation, both in terms of the main roadways, but also the on-base personnel. We met with DNRAC Fish and Wildlife. So they do have some existing easements for hunting, wildlife viewing, and fishing. The two closest wildlife areas are the Little Creek and the Ted Harvey. You can see on this map, I'm sorry, it's not very big. Blue areas are owned or lands that have easements. So we talked about those areas. Fish and Wildlife has very few easements. They have about 15 total. I believe that was statewide, and they're all in perpetuity. So there's similar initiatives that they do that kind of mirror the same thing that the Department of Agriculture is doing in terms of dedicating land. But acquisitions are, for new easements, are owner initiated. So they are, I'll call it reactive versus proactive. They don't approach a property owner and ask them if they would like to become part of the program. They wait for the owner to approach them. So we did talk about, do people in the area know that this program exists? Do they know that they need to approach you? Do they know the process? So there's some work to do looking into that, to making sure that that program is known throughout, and what's a good way to help get the word out. There is an open space council, and so they provide guidance on land acquisitions, and there is funding if easements, if property owners do want to enter into an agreement, there is funding available. They share in DNRAC's budget. Because it's a reactive type approach, there's not really maintained maps of areas where, oh, we'd love to get that into our program, or we'd love to go over here, or this is adjacent to here. So it's generally, waiting for people who have the land to approach them. And we asked about farmland. Is an ideal thing to just, take up a farm that's maybe out there looking to sell or do a different approach. And while it's hard to find an easement that does not have farm on it, the farm itself is not an ideal habitat. So learned a lot about that program and process. And then we also talked about Port Mahon. So there is a very extensive study on Port Mahon. It has a lot of good information from existing conditions, concerns and challenges to the solutions. So we will be including parts of that report in this plan. We certainly don't need to start over on that. That's a very good report and program that will be coming into play very shortly. So obviously the road is critical to getting fuel to the base and maintaining the pipeline. There's a popular fishing pier on Port Mahon, and so that was recently redocked. And then at the very end of Port Mahon is a heavily used boat ramp. The town of Little Creek even uses this for their rescue mission. So it's important that we maintain access to Port Mahon, but obviously the road conditions are difficult. So DelDOT did add riprap and rocks to along the side of it to try to stop the waves from coming up, but there is a much larger, we'll loosely say better, although I don't want to say better, plan in place to help mitigate these improvements. So we talked to Denrec Parks. Obviously, they're very excited about looking at future uses for the borrow pit, and we look forward to their help in our charrette with vetting out ideas. You know, I think everyone talked about this connection to the St. John's Greenway, so that will definitely be a conversation point as we move forward into the charrette. And you know, there's lots of long-range ideas as well by the parks for a whole host of recreational ideas for the borrow pit. And I think, you know, vetting those out with compatible land uses will certainly be a conversation that we need to have. The other thing was the clear zone on the southern approach. That has some runway restrictions and could probably have even tighter restrictions. There's definitely some easement improvements that could be done for that area. And it does also encompass several of the existing ponds that are there. We met with DelDOT's Homeland Security and Emergency Management Planning. They have a very, very, very good relationship with the base. They're in close communication at all times. It's imperative that when an issue occurs at the base, they let DelDOT know so that they can implement their traffic diversion plans. And for the most part, that has been happening and is working very well. You know, the biggest thing that DelDOT wanted everyone to know is just, you know, when they have to move something like an SR1, it takes a lot of coordination, especially if it's not, you know, during the day when they're on full staff. You know, they have to get everybody in. They gotta mobilize. So getting that information in is critical. Again, talking about that zone of frangibility, you know, just making sure that that information is readily available and, you know, maybe part of the policy manuals or the, you know, regulation manuals that DelDOT has, making sure that signs and things like that aren't going in these zones and are not meeting the requirements for breakaway and height and things like that. And then, you know, just maintaining and managing the capacity of SR1, which DelDOT definitely has plans to monitor and continue doing in the short and long term. We met with the DelDOT Resiliency and Sustainability Office, and we talked again about Port Mahon. So there is a plan that's being implemented. They're about to give notice to proceed to an engineering consultant to start plans for that. The first, it's being phased. So the first segment is the 1 mile high mortality zone, where it appears that the most horseshoe crabs are dying. So that will be the first segment. They'll be able to see how that works, how it's been implemented, how it's going, and then they'll do future segments. It does include wave action mitigation that's offshore. and they will be reusing the rocks that DelDOT put out there. So that is not a, throw it away and it was money not well spent. They will be reusing that. They will be completing this project under all grant funding. So there's a lot of grant funding out there. And so DENREC and DelDOT will not have to use their own funds. They're pretty confident that they can get grants for this work. So estimated construction, they're hoping to start next year and complete it as soon as possible. And DENREC will be a critical partner in permitting this. So, the design is one thing, getting it permitted is another. So they're all going to work together to make that happen. The same office is working with all the districts within DelDOT to determine frequently flooded roadways. So when in the GIS map of existing conditions that we put together, there's not too many flooded roadways that we know about in and around our study area. There's a little area that comes in to the east, but in general, it looked relatively dry. But certainly if the base or any agency is starting to see changes in this, DelDOT would love to know because they will prioritize that. They're also putting into effect a national electric vehicle plan where they will be implementing electric vehicle charging stations. And so they're going to work with the base. The base has their initiative going, and so they'll make sure that those are coordinated. And Horse Pond Road did receive earmark funding, which I talked about earlier. So we talked to Jeff Dawson, who manages the borrow pit at Pensy Supply. So they own and manage most of what we call the borrow pit. There are two other property owners on the periphery of the borrow pit. There's George & Lynch and Diamond Materials. So we did talk to George & Lynch. I don't believe we heard back from Diamond Materials yet, but I could be mistaken on that. So essentially there's two sand and gravel pits within 5 miles of the base. They've been in operation since the 50s and 60s. They obtain materials from other quarries, even quarries out of state. And this particular borrow pit is one of the top 2 suppliers for construction aggregate in Delaware. They're also key suppliers for construction materials in Maryland and Pennsylvania. All of their materials come in and out by truck. They don't have too many transportation issues directly related to congestion or things like that. However, they do have issues, for example, when the base has their flyovers and things like that, people tend to pull over to watch the planes because, who isn't excited about seeing that? And so, there might be some coordination and cooperation that could be done in terms of that. They foresee their operations continuing at least another 10 to 15 years. So they do not think that they will be finished anytime soon. And they have, according to Jeff Dawson, they don't have long range plans for what they would do with the borrow pit when it's finished, because as far as they can see, it's so far out.
And just to add to that, even when the mining operations are done, they're still going to have that aggregate import business and still run that operation. So even if they're not exporting, they'll continue to import and have a distribution center at this location.
Yep. So they are very excited to be an active participant in our charrette in the fall. So that's great. And one of the things that we talked about with them was, if there was any potential to change or make improvements to the golf course, there's a frontage road, and would they be open to changes and allowing access? And so they are open to anything and everything that, at least discussing anything in the area that would, help the community, help the base, and certainly, maintain safety and security, but they want to be active partners in this. So that was a really good conversation. Then we met with Matt Jordan, who was on all the calls. So it was great because after each interview, we were able to talk with Matt, and he was able to be an active participant in all of our conversations and bring up, topics and questions for each agency or each interview that, it's just great insider information. So he is also working on the transportation plan. So we're not going to have a gap in information sharing. And, he shared a lot more information with us as we started working through the interviews. We're like, oh, we'd like this piece of information or that. He was able to give it to us so we can use it as part of our investigation. And obviously, same concerns that we've heard throughout: the easements, the ordinances, reading them, where do we need to update them, the joint land use policies between the base and other agencies, making sure that everyone along the line of review, comment, approvals, et cetera, has all the information, knows the areas of concern, knows the zones of frangibility, knows where there's safety concerns or security concerns. And then obviously with the base and all these airplanes, bird migration, and making sure that we don't introduce a land use that would create new obstacles and new issues. We also met with the base's engineering department, and we talked about, how could we maybe improve the number of people who use the golf course. Maybe there's an option for, a new entrance or moving part of it, or even reducing it in scale and using some of the property for another use. He does not foresee changes in base housing right now. They're maxed out, and they don't necessarily see a plan in the near future for adding land to increase this. Same thing, concerns with easements, ordinances, languages, land use, warehousing, what's being stored in there. Does that put the base at risk? And, same, how can we make sure that all the land use agencies know all the information that we've talked about on almost all of these slides, so that everybody's making informed decisions? Even down to, tree trimming, who does it, who pays for it, who gets to keep all the wood, those types of things can certainly still be vetted out in the near future. And then we talked with base operations. So once the joint use agreement is fully in place, development is going to happen. And this plan is so important for making sure that those land uses are compatible. Same with the zone of frangibility and the vulnerability of the approach runway. Who's allowed in that APZ1 area, because that could definitely be a security concern. And so then he gave us some additional instructions and regulations that we could look at, get information, as well as we discussed cell tower construction and compatible uses that, maybe 30 years ago made sense in the current term, maybe still make sense, but will they in the future? So we talked with Georgia Lynch. They operate a hot mix plant with Diamond Materials located between the golf course and the borrow pit and Pensy Supply. They have a perpetual access agreement on the Pensy property, and they have no plans to not be there and not be operating. They were also want to participate in the charrette. Again, very active partners who want to help see this plan through, but also, the viability of the area and the base. They also have a business. Their business is on Lafferty Lane with no plans currently to expand. And then they have a site adjacent to SR1 where they have storage. We talked to the Department of Safety and Homeland Security. Obviously, very good partner with the Air Force Base for Homeland Security. They coordinate on special events, when POTUS visits, also information shared through the Delaware Information Analysis Center. So the Homeland Security and the Air Force Base sit on the Homeland Security Advisory Council, coordinate and report on the various activities that are happening, and also are able to identify threats and put plans into place to mitigate those. There is a concern about the security of fuel storage operation. Occasionally the roadway is impassable. There's no security presence. And, you know, if there was no fuel farm, it would result in 63 fuel trucks per day. So that is a lot to secure, maintain. So definitely a concern for maintaining the viability of Port Mahon. The Delaware Office of State Planning. So we talked about, you know, outside of the growth zone, what is characterized as low density rural areas, and having regulations in place to prevent large subdivisions from being developed there. So it's a sliding scale. The more residences that you want to put into a subdivision, the higher acreage you're required. So the largest would require a parcel up to 4 acres. So as a result of this, they haven't seen too much large subdivisions coming through there. So that seems to be mitigating, but obviously we want to take a look at this for, you know, in the future. 13 to 20 home subdivisions are pretty popular right now. We want to look at, you know, where they are planned. Are they in the area of concern? Are they close to the munitions area? You know, do you want your family living in this area? Is, you know, a question that we talked about. And then how do you get that information out? What needs to be put into place to make sure that people are understanding of this area and making informed decisions. Currently, there's no services in place, additional services being planned for in strategy 3 and 4 areas. However, they're coordinating with the city of Dover, they're coordinating with the county as things are changing, as the city is annexing, you know, they will support that growth. They're going to be compliant with the comprehensive plan. So, you know, that's been vetted, that's been agreed upon. And so that's what basically they're following. The CDAC area, you know, almost everything coming in there is aviation based. So that's compatible. They will support that as necessary. And then we went back to that same conversation of, you know, potentially creating different classifications of industrial zoning, or having an overlay, or, you know, prescribing certain number of people per acre, just making sure that the development that comes in is compatible with the base, is in compliance. So I've probably touched on these already, you know, telling you the common themes, but these are really the things that we've heard over and over and over again. You know, the basis is there. There's a lot of existing documents. There's a lot of work that has been done between all the agencies and the Air Force Base. You know, there's a lot of cooperation, a lot of coordination already in place. And it's been successful so far. You know, couple things here or there that the agencies and the base are working through. The question is, you know, using those as a foundation, how can we make it even better? You know, we're going to look at the easements, we're going to look at the ordinances, and we want to do so with a forward-thinking approach. You know, obviously we can't necessarily see into the future, but hopefully narrowing some things down will help make sure that it works for the foreseeable future. You know, looking at the density of people in certain zones, or implementing an overlay, or an additional caveat to the zoning district, just to make sure that we're not introducing large number of people. Looking for areas where there's information gaps, well, I approved plans, I didn't know about this area of concern, or, I was designing a plan, I didn't know that there was a height restriction. How do we make sure that everyone knows that that's part of the design standards or the approval process, that, that is flagged. And then certainly the borrow pit, I don't think it's going anywhere, but I think working through it and talking about it and having the charrette is still important, because we want this plan to go the long haul. We want this plan to be for the far future. So if and when the borrow pit is finished, at least the mining portion, what does happen with that land? So we'll have at least some conversations and a foundation for that. Base security, looking at those different areas, who's allowed where, do we need something more secure for, an APZ1? What about APZ2? And then the land preservation programs. We're going to speak with the Department of Agriculture coming up soon, the next week or two, between them and Fish and Wildlife and Parks, what do their processes look like? And is there any movement there? Is there any potential to look at a different type of process, or how do we meld that process into this one, so that as things do start moving and improving and developing, we have this potential to protect some areas. And then obviously Fort Mahon, we all want to see that successful and maintained, and that is moving forward. So are there any questions or comments on any of that? I know that was a lot of information. I tried to go through it quickly without totally glazing over it. And I just want to say, I appreciate everyone's participation. I mean, it really was very little arm twisting to get people to do these interviews, and everybody's so busy, and it's summer and vacation, so we really do appreciate everyone's time on all of those. All right, so our schedule, I try to blow it up because it's so hard to see that big schedule, but I'm going to say we're essentially finished our stakeholder interviews. I know we have a few more, but now we're going to move into the rest of July and August. We'll be sifting through all that information, looking at all the data, and start looking for the conflicts. So our conflict compatibility analysis is next. And then in September, we'll be looking at the conflict resolution strategies. So developing strategies, tools, techniques, processes, policies, recommendations. How can we take all the concerns that we saw and turn them into a plan of policy and recommendations that can help preserve the base? And then by December, November, December, we'll be working on finalizing the draft and final plans, so that we take it back out to the community. So I do have kind of our next steps. Conflict identification, July, August, our borrow pit, September, conflict resolution strategies, September, looking at recommendations in October, and then working on the final plan. So we'll be finished by the end of the year, and we'll take that draft plan, all the information, a summary of everything that we've done, and go back out to the public one more time. So 2 more times we'll go out to the public with the charrette in September, and then the workshop in December, and we'll be asking for everyone's help on getting the information out. And also, I do have my notes from earlier in our meeting. We'll implement those as well. So with that, I will open it up to any discussion, questions, comments, feedback. All right. Well, I appreciate everyone joining us today. 9 minutes into lunch, so hopefully I didn't take too long. And as we get, so this PowerPoint will be emailed to you, I believe. Is that right, Jen? We've been doing that. So you'll
Yes.
have all that information. And then I will be sifting through my 30 pages of notes and creating, I'll call formal meeting minutes, but it would be more like a stakeholder interview report. And so once that's completed, I'll also send that to Jen. She can send that out as well. And then you'll have all the information that we have at your fingertips as we move forward in the study.
Thank you, Sonia and Drew and Matt, for doing all of these interviews, and Sonia for summarizing them so well today.
All right. Thanks, everybody. See you
Have
soon.
Bye-bye. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.